Eli didn't even belong inside the clubhouse when the first shot hit him. 1 second he was the homeless kid everyone stepped around, sweeping up broken glass for scraps, hovering near the bar just close enough to hear the laughter he'd never been part of. The next, he was between a loaded gun and the Hell's Angel sister who'd been slipping him food and calling him kid like it meant something. 2 bullets slammed into his chest on that sticky concrete floor, right under the club's painted skull, while nobody moved fast enough to save him. But as his blood spread toward the boots of patched members, 300 bikers outside kicked their engines to life, rolling toward a reckoning that would shake every brick of that clubhouse. Welcome to the Echo Tales family. If you're just finding this channel, go ahead and subscribe now, because the journey you're about to take will reach places in your heart you didn't see coming. And to everyone who's been riding with me from the start, may God pour out favor, protection, and abundance over your life. Before we step into this story, let's take a moment to pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for every person watching right now. Cover them and their families with your protection. Heal every place that's hurting, open doors where there seems to be none, and fill their hearts and homes with a peace that goes beyond understanding. Let your presence rest on them today. In Jesus' mighty name, Amen. Now, the story you're about to hear is about a homeless boy who chose courage over comfort and put his own life on the line to do what was right. When a young life was in danger and everyone else froze, he stepped forward, and nothing inside the clubhouse was ever the same again. The music was too loud for a place that felt this tense. Old rock thumped through the clubhouse speakers, guitars grinding over a bass line that made the empty beer bottles on the bar buzz softly against the wood. Neon signs hummed in the corners, throwing sickly red and blue over walls plastered with faded posters and club flags. Smoke hung in the air, cigarettes, cheap cigars, the ghost of burnt rubber curling in from the garage out back. Somewhere, someone laughed too loudly at a joke that wasn't funny, trying to pretend they didn't feel the storm building. Eli watched it all from the shadows. He occupied the thin strip of concrete just inside the back door, where the clubhouse's warm chaos bled into the cold night air. Half in, half out. That was where he always seemed to live. The metal door behind him was propped open with a cinder block, letting in a thin ribbon of winter that curled around his ankles. His sneakers were split at the sides, socks showing through, damp from the melted snow outside the fence. He kept one hand clenched around the handle of a push broom, the other wrapped tight around the strap of his backpack, which never left his reach. From here, he could see almost everything and almost no one saw him. The bar ran along the left wall, a long scar of stained wood under rows of mismatched liquor bottles. Club patches, photos, and road maps layered the walls around it, years of history nailed into place. Pool tables sat in the middle of the room, felt worn thin in spots where too many cues had scraped. A massive painted skull with wings, Hell's Angels colors, sprawled across the far wall behind a battered leather sofa, watching everything with empty black eyes. Eli's stomach growled. The sound was swallowed by the music, but he felt it like a punch. He'd eaten half a sandwich 6 hours ago. A mercy from the bartender when she caught him eyeing someone's leftovers on a plate left at the edge of the bar. He'd made that half stretch as far as he could, sipping water, chewing slow, letting crumbs sit on his tongue until they dissolved. Now the hollow ache was back, sharp and familiar. He swept. The broom rasped across the concrete, pushing bottle caps, cigarette butts, and dust into a small, stubborn pile. Every few passes he glanced up, eyes flicking over leather vests, Patches, faces. He knew them all by sight, even if most of them only knew him as Kid, or Stray, or Hey You. Prospects hustled between tables. Full Patches leaned over the bar. Someone slammed a pool ball into a pocket hard enough that it ricocheted off the wood with a crack. On the far side of the room, under the big skull, Razor sat in his usual chair. The club president looked like he'd been carved out of the same concrete Eli was sweeping. Broad shoulders under a heavy vest crusted with patches. Gray streaking his dark beard. Thick hands wrapped around a beer bottle that looked small there. People flowed around him without jostling him, like a river bending around a rock. Whenever he leaned forward to say something, the men nearest him dipped their heads to listen. To Eli, he was both gravity and lightning. Something you couldn't escape and didn't dare get too close to. A burst of cold air rolled over Eli's neck. He didn't need to turn to know who had just walked past him from the lot. The temperature in the room shifted the way it always did when she came in, like someone had opened a door in a storm and invited only one person through. "Your sweeping still sucks," Gina said by way of greeting. Eli allowed himself half a smile. "Floor's big," he muttered, eyes still on his work. "Broom's small." Her boots clicked against the concrete as she stepped fully inside, letting the door thunk shut behind her. Worn black leather, laces crusted with salt from the roads. Grease smudged the knees of her jeans, oil stains mapping the hours she'd spent in the garage with her hands inside engines that cost more than Eli's life had ever been worth to anyone. He finally looked up. Gina's Hell's Angels cut sat on her shoulders like it had grown there, patches catching the neon light. Her dark hair was shoved back in a messy knot, a few strands sticking to the sheen of sweat on her neck. She smelled like gasoline, cold air, and the cheap orange soap they kept by the shop sink. She had a to-go container in her hand. His gaze snagged on it for a heartbeat too long, and she noticed. Of course she did. She noticed everything. "Don't drool on the floor," she said. "I just got you halfway through cleaning it." "I'm not." He started, but his traitor's stomach growled again, louder this time. Gina's mouth twitched. "Relax," she said, thrusting the container toward him. Leftovers from church folks who think bikers are scary but still drop off casseroles at the gate. "I can't." "You can," she cut in. "Or I give it to Razor and let him bulk up those biceps everyone's so impressed with." Eli flinched, eyes darting instinctively toward the president's corner. Razor was talking to a couple of patched members near the bar, back to them, but Eli still felt exposed. Gina sighed. "Take the food, Eli." He took it. The plastic was warm against his cold fingers. He cracked the lid just enough to let steam escape and a rich, savory smell rolled out, meat, cheese, something baked. His throat tightened. He wanted to shove the whole thing into his mouth in 3 bites. Instead, he set the broom aside, slid down with his back against the wall, and pulled his knees up so the container could rest there. He took a small forkful. It tasted like salt and kindness and something he wasn't sure he deserved. If you're watching this right now, imagine sitting where Eli is, back against a concrete wall, trying to stretch one warm meal like it has to last all week. If stories like this hit you in the chest, take a second to like this video, subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We're all standing in this clubhouse together tonight. Gina watched him for a second, arms crossed. "You sleep at the shelter last night?" she asked. He shook his head, chewing. "Full," he said. "Said I missed check-in." "Under the bridge again?" "Behind the shop," he answered. "Less wind." Her jaw worked. "You know you can knock on the back door if it gets bad," she said. "I told you that. And have Razor find me on his floor." Eli snorted softly. "I like my legs unbroken, thanks." Gina rolled her eyes. "He's not gonna break your legs," she said. "He's just, old school." "Old school like, no strays inside the clubhouse," Eli said. "I get it. It's fine. I got my spot." He didn't mention how long the nights felt when the music cut off and the engines died, when the only thing between him and the dark was a dumpster and a thin blanket someone had thrown out months ago. Or the way he lay there sometimes, listening to muffled laughter and clinking glasses on the other side of the wall, pretending he was in there instead of out here. Gina followed his gaze to Razor. "He didn't want me here at first either," she said quietly. "Said this life wasn't for kids. Said I'd get chewed up." "What changed?" Eli asked. She shrugged one shoulder. "I didn't leave," she said simply. "Got my hands dirty. Took hits when they came. Proved I wasn't going to fold." Her eyes flicked back to him. "You've been showing up. That counts for something." "Showing up to sweep and take out trash," Eli said. "Real impressive." "Showing up when you could have disappeared," she corrected. "There's a difference." He looked down at the food again, appetite dimming under the weight of her words. "Why do you care, Gina?" he asked, voice low. "You got a whole club. You got Razor, you got brothers. I'm just, nobody." Her brow furrowed. "You're a kid who got tossed like garbage," she said. "I remember what that felt like." Eli blinked. "You?" he scoffed. "You're patched. You're solid. Nobody tossed you." "Not now," she said. "But there was a time when the only thing between me and the street was the fact that my brother decided I wasn't staying there." He followed the line of her gaze back to Razor. On the far side of the room, the president laughed at something, a low rumble that carried even over the music. One of the men near him clapped him on the shoulder. Another leaned in to say something, eyes darting toward Gina's corner. Razor's eyes tracked the movement, then shifted, landing briefly on them. Eli's pulse kicked. For a second, he felt pinned to the wall by that look. Razor's gaze flicked over him, taking in the too-thin frame, the second-hand coat, the food container balanced on his knees. Then it slid to Gina. Something unreadable passed between them, a tiny nod, a question asked and answered without words. Then Razor turned back to his conversation. "See?" Eli muttered. "He doesn't even." "He saw you," Gina interrupted. "He knows you're here. If he wanted you gone, you'd be scraping your face off the parking lot by now." "Comforting," Eli said dryly. She smirked. "Point is, you're not invisible," she said. "Not as much as you think." He wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that his sweeping, his quiet help in the garage, his refusal to steal from the clubhouse bar when no one was looking meant something. That Gina's late-night containers of leftovers and tossed blankets weren't just pity. The truth sat heavier than the food in his stomach. People like him didn't get to belong in places like this. They hovered at the edges until someone got tired of stepping around them and told them to move on. A glass shattered somewhere near the bar. The sound cut through the music, a bright, jarring crack that turned heads. The bartender cursed, grabbing a rag. The guy who dropped it laughed too loud, cheeks red, hands raised like he was already apologizing. Razor's eyes narrowed just a fraction, then softened as the moment passed. The air, however, didn't go back to normal. Eli felt it before he could explain it, the way conversations didn't quite pick back up to their previous volume, the way shoulders stayed a little tenser, the way eyes seemed to slide more often toward the front door. "Something's off," Gina murmured. He looked at her. "How do you know?" She shrugged. "Same way you know when it's about to snow," she said. "You can feel the weather change." As if on cue, the main door banged open. Cold rushed in, undercutting the warmth and noise. Music kept playing, but the notes suddenly sounded thin, far away. Heads turned. A few men at the bar straightened from their stools. Prospects near the door shifted, unconsciously forming a loose line without being told. Eli's grip tightened on the container. He saw boots first, broad and heavy, tracking in melted slush. Then denim. Then leather. Patches he didn't recognize at a glance. The man who stepped into the light carried himself with a swagger that didn't match Razor's. This one was flashier, sharper, like a knife waved around just to prove it existed. Gina's jaw clenched. "Stay put," she said under her breath. Eli's heart started to pound, each beat echoing in his ears louder than the music. For the first time since he'd been allowed this close to the inside of the clubhouse, he wished the back door behind him was still open. The music didn't stop when the strangers walked in. It just sounded wrong, suddenly too bright and too loud against the silence that fell over the voices. The man at the front let the door swing shut behind him with a careless flick of his wrist, as if he owned the hinges. Two others followed, fanning out just enough to make it clear they weren't here alone. Their cuts were black, their patches wrong, different animal, different colors, stitched in red that looked almost wet under the neon. Eli had never seen them this close before, but he'd heard the name whispered around the fire barrels out back. Scorpions. They stood just inside the threshold, letting the cold they dragged in seep into the clubhouse. Conversations died mid-sentence. A pool cue clacked uselessly against felt and then stopped. The bartender slipped her hand under the counter where everyone knew a bat lived. Razor didn't get up. He stayed in his chair under the skull on the far wall, one arm draped over the back, beer bottle hanging loose in his hand. Only his eyes moved, tracking the newcomers with flat, assessing calm. The men nearest him shifted their weight, shoulders angling, subtly closing ranks around their president without needing to be told. "Evening," the lead scorpion drawled, voice loud enough to bounce off every concrete surface in the room. Heard this was the place to be if a man wanted to talk business. Nobody moved for half a heartbeat. Then Razor tipped his head, just once. "You lost," he said. "This is members' night." The scorpion smiled. It didn't touch his eyes. "Clubhouse looks open to me," he said. "Lights on, bars stocked, prospects on their feet. Thought maybe your people forgot which roads they've been riding lately. Came to remind you whose paint is under their tires." Eli felt Gina shift beside him. She'd stepped a little in front of him without him noticing, body angled so that her shoulder was between him and the strangers. Her fingers flexed at her sides, grease-stained knuckles whitening. The patch on her back, the same winged skull painted on the wall, seemed to bristle. If stories like this pull you right into the room, stay close, hit like and subscribe so you're here for the next beat, because in this clubhouse, one wrong word can spill blood faster than any bottle. The scorpion's gaze skimmed the faces clustered around the bar, the pool tables, the door. It landed on Gina. "Well, look who they finally let sit at the big kids' table," he said. "Razor's little prodigy. Gina, right?" Her jaw tightened. "You had to drive all the way out here just to say my name wrong?" she asked. "That's sad." Laughter rippled through the angels nearest her, low and dark. The scorpion's smile thinned. "We got a problem," he said, eyes flicking back to Razor. "Your colors on our roads. Your trucks cutting through our territory. Product moving without a single check-in. That's disrespect." Razor took a slow sip of his beer, the bottle tilted just enough to catch the light. "You come into my house to lecture me on respect?" he asked. "Houses burn," the scorpion replied. "Lines don't. You know that." Eli's fingers dug into the edge of the food container, forgotten now and cooling on his knees. The broom lay on the floor beside him, half his pile of trash scattered by the draft when the door opened. He could feel the club's heartbeat through the soles of his shoes, a shared, rising pulse of anger and something else. Anticipation. Dread. Razor finally set his beer down. "We've been running those roads longer than your patch has been stitched," he said. "You got a complaint, you pick up a phone. You don't walk into my clubhouse with your colors flashing and your nose in the air." The scorpion's eyes hardened. "Tried the phone," he said. "Got prospects. Got, he'll get back to you. Got nothing. So now you got us." He spread his hands, mock polite. "Consider this a friendly reminder that some lines still mean something." Gina took a step forward. "You roll up here with 3 bodies and a mouth full of threats and call that friendly?" she asked. "Maybe your dictionary's as cheap as your patches." The man nearest her, one of the angel lieutenants, shot her a look, half warning, half admiration. The lead scorpion's gaze sharpened. "We can keep this light," he said, though the edge in his voice said otherwise. "You agree to stop running through our slice, we pretend this visit never happened. Or..." He let the word hang there, heavy. Eli's chest felt tight. He could see the distances now, not just between people, but between choices. How many steps from the door to the bar? How long it would take someone to cross the room if a shot went off? Where the nearest solid table was that he could get behind. Years on the street had taught him to measure spaces like that. It was the only school he'd ever finished. Razor's hand curled around the neck of his bottle. "Or you overstep," he said softly, "in front of men who have buried better enemies than you." The room seemed to tilt. Eli heard a glass set down too hard. A chair leg scraped. Someone exhaled sharp through their teeth. The scorpion's smile slipped away completely. "Last chance, old man," he said. "Tell your people to pull back. Stay off our highways. Or this house you're sitting in gets a new coat of paint." Razor stood. He didn't rush. He didn't posture. He just rose to his full height under the skull on the wall, leather creaking, and let the room see exactly how much space he took up. For a moment, Eli saw him the way the others did, not just as the man who barked orders in the garage, but as the axis everything here spun around. He stepped forward once, then again, closing some of the distance. "We're done talking about roads," he said. "You come pounding on my door about respect, you should have brought more men." The scorpion's hand slid behind his back. It was casual, almost bored, but Eli's stomach dropped. He'd seen that movement before, in alleyways and on bad nights in parking lots where arguments had gone sideways. Jacket lifts. Elbow angles. The way a body shifted when it remembered the weight at its waistband. Gun. Time slowed. The music kept playing, but it felt like it was underwater now, sound smeared and distant. Gina's shoulders squared. Razor's expression didn't change, but the men around him leaned in, ready to move. A prospect near the door took one half-step back, eyes wide. Eli's heart hammered. If you don't want to miss what happens the moment a hand disappears behind a rival's back, make sure you're locked in, hit like, subscribe, and stay right here inside this room with Eli, because you're about to see what loyalty really costs. Metal flashed. The scorpion pulled the gun free with smooth, practiced ease, black barrel cutting a line through the smoky air. For a heartbeat, it pointed at the floor. Then his wrist twitched, lifting it, bringing the muzzle up toward Razor's chest. "Don't," Gina snapped. She was already moving, stepping between them without thinking. 1 second she was at Eli's shoulder, the next she was out in the open, the cut on her back a clear target under the neon. The scorpion's eyes flickered, just briefly, to her. "Move, sweetheart," he said. "This isn't your bullet." She didn't. "Only cowards point guns at men in their own home," she said. "You sure you patched into the right club?" Someone to Eli's right muttered, "Gina, damn it." The gun's barrel lifted another inch. Eli's breath caught. He saw it all at once, the line from the muzzle to Gina's chest, the wall of bottles behind the bar, the way Razor's weight was centered, ready to lunge but too far to intercept in time. He saw the door behind him, still cracked open a sliver, cold air sneaking in like a whispered suggestion, "Run." He thought of the nights Gina had opened that same door from the inside, shoving food into his hands, shoving blankets into his arms, shoving back against a world that had already decided he was disposable. He thought of Razor, scowling as she argued to keep Eli around, taking a risk on a kid who swept floors and slept behind dumpsters. He thought of all the times he'd stayed outside the fence because he told himself this wasn't his world, this wasn't his fight. The scorpion's finger tightened on the trigger. In that split second, Eli understood something he hadn't let himself say out loud. If Gina dropped here, everything she'd poured into him died on that floor too. His body moved before the thought finished forming. He dropped the container. It hit the concrete, lid popping off, food splattering across his boots. He shoved off the wall with both hands, legs uncoiling, the broom clattering away at his side. The room stretched, every detail painfully sharp, the grain of the wood on the bar, the gleam of Razor's rings, the flat black of the gun's barrel. Eli sprinted. His lungs burned as cold air knifed in. The distance between him and Gina felt like a mile and an inch at the same time. He saw her start to turn, eyes widening, mouth opening to shout his name. The gun fired. The first shot cracked through the music, turning it to noise. Pain bloomed in Eli's side, hot and blinding, as the bullet tore into him just above the hip. His stride stumbled but didn't stop. Momentum carried him forward, body twisting, arms outstretched. He slammed into Gina, knocking her sideways, shoving her out of the line of fire. The second shot came a heartbeat later. He didn't see the muzzle flash this time, only felt the impact hammer into his chest. The breath whooshed out of him. The floor rushed up, concrete unforgiving as it caught his knees, then his shoulder, then the side of his face. The world tilted. Voices blurred into a single roar. Someone screamed his name. He thought it was Gina, but it might have been himself, mind shrieking inside a body that suddenly wouldn't obey. Warmth spread under him, soaking into his shirt, his fingers, the cracks in the floor. He stared up at the skull on the wall, its black eyes empty, wings spread wide as if they were about to lift off. For the first time since he'd started hovering at the edges of this world, Eli wasn't on the outside looking in. He was right in the center, bleeding where everyone could see. The first thing Eli felt was weight. Not the bullets, not at first, those were fire and shock and a weird, spreading numbness. The weight was Gina, crashing down beside him on the concrete as he shoved her out of the line of fire. Her shoulder hit the floor, her boots skidded, and then her hands were on him, trying to grab, to pull, to hold him together with fingers that shook more than she'd ever admit. Eli. Her voice tore out of her raw. Eli, look at me. Hey. Look at me. He couldn't remember closing his eyes, but when he forced them open, the clubhouse lights were too bright. Neon halos smeared across his vision, turning faces into streaks of color. The music had cut off, the speakers hummed a low, empty buzz. All the sound now was shouting and boots and the high, panicked breathing right above him. He tried to move. Pain stabbed through his side and chest, white and sharp, then rolled back into a heavy throbbing ache. Warmth spread out from where he'd been hit, soaking his shirt, seeping between his fingers when he pressed his hand instinctively to his ribs. It felt like the concrete was drinking him in. If you've stayed with Eli this far, bleeding on this clubhouse floor, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss a single heartbeat, because what this club does next will show you exactly what brotherhood means when the music stops. Somewhere beyond Gina, someone roared, "He shot the kid." Another voice, deeper and colder, snapped, "Weapons down. Don't move." Razor. Eli's gaze dragged past Gina's tear-bright eyes, over her shoulder. The president stood in the center of the room, between the scorpions and his own men. His arms were spread slightly, palms out, like he was holding two storms apart by will alone. The gun that had dropped Eli still smoked in the rival's hand, barrel wavering as the man realized just how many muzzles were now aimed back at him. "You fire again," Razor said quietly, "you won't make it to the parking lot." The lead scorpion's bravado had bled out faster than Eli's. Sweat beaded at his temple. His gaze darted from Razor to the wall of angels behind him, dozens of men and women with their hands hovering close to the steel they carried, eyes gone flat and murderous. He moved, the scorpion snapped, voice cracking just enough to betray the fear under it. That bullet wasn't. Razor's eyes flicked down to Eli. To the boy sprawled on the concrete, hoodie blooming red, Gina on her knees beside him with shaking hands pressed to his chest and side. Eli saw the moment it landed. The moment Razor registered what had actually happened. His expression didn't twist. It didn't break. It hardened. "You came into my house," he said, voice low and deadly. "You put a gun on my people. And when a kid with nothing stepped up and showed you what loyalty looks like, you shot him. Twice." He took a step forward. The scorpion flinched. Behind him, his two men shifted, half raising their weapons. Then freezing when a dozen angels immediately mirrored the move, steel clearing leather with a whisper that sounded louder than any shout. "Put it down," Razor said. Silence pressed in. The rival's jaw clenched. For a moment, Eli thought he might actually be stupid enough to try for another shot. But then something in his eyes gave, some thin filament of gut snapped under the weight of all those stares. Slowly, stiffly, he lowered the gun. The metal clinked faintly as he let it drop to the floor. The second it hit, 3 angels moved. They slammed the scorpions onto the concrete, boots and knees grinding them down, hands wrenching arms behind backs. One of the rivals swore, another yelped as a shoulder popped. The leader grunted as a heavy boot planted firmly between his shoulder blades. Razor didn't look at them again. He was already moving toward Eli. Gina didn't notice at first. She was too focused on the way Eli's chest rose in stuttering, shallow breaths. Her hands were slick with his blood, palms sliding as she tried to keep pressure where it mattered. "You're okay," she lied, over and over. "You're okay, you're okay, you're okay." "Gina," Eli rasped. The word came out a wet whisper, bubbles of air and copper. Her gaze snapped to his. "Don't talk," she said quickly. "Save it. Just, stay awake, you hear me?" He wanted to say something cool. Something like the lines he'd heard in movies. Instead, all that came was, cold. Her face crumpled for a second before she got it back under control. "I know," she said. "They're getting an ambulance. You're gonna." A heavy shadow fell over them. Gina looked up. Razor dropped to one knee beside Eli, leather creaking, the absolute last person Eli had expected to see this close. The president's beard was flecked with gray, eyes shockingly clear in the harsh light. Up close, Eli could see small scars around them, pale lines lost in the weathered skin. "Move your hands a sec," Razor said. Gina's mouth opened. "If I move?" "Just a second," he repeated, and there was a tone in his voice that brooked no argument. Reluctantly, she eased her palms away from Eli's chest and side. Blood welled up instantly through his torn hoodie. Razor's hand followed, fingers pressing in, not gentle, but not cruel either. He mapped the damage with the kind of quick, clinical touch that said he'd done this before, in other bars, other fights, other nights when the sirens were too far away. High side, he muttered. Through and through. Lower rib, missed the liver if he's lucky. His jaw flexed. Kid's tougher than he looks. Eli tried to laugh. It came out as a strangled cough. The room shuddered with the sound of distant sirens, faint but growing. Red and blue lights flickered outside the narrow windows, turning the skull on the wall into a thing pulsing with color. If you're still here with Eli on this floor, watching every breath fight to stay in his chest, tap like and subscribe so you're riding with him when those sirens hit the door, because what happens between now and the hospital will decide who this club really is. Ambulance is 5 out, someone yelled from near the entrance, phone pressed to their ear. They said keep pressure, keep him awake. Razor's hand pressed down again, harder. Eli groaned as pain flared. His vision grayed at the edges. Stay with me, kid, Razor said, gaze locking onto his. What's your name? Eli, he managed. Razor nodded once. Eli, he repeated, like he was engraving it into something. You know what you just did, Eli? He didn't. All he knew was that his body had moved and the bullets had hit him instead of Gina. All he knew was that he hurt in more places than he knew he had. You took rounds for family, Razor said. You weren't wearing a patch. Nobody told you to. You could have walked out that back door and nobody would have blamed you. But you didn't. Gina's fingers dug into Eli's shoulder, just above the sling of his backpack strap. He's just a kid, she choked. He shouldn't have. He did, Razor cut in. And that means something. Around them, the room stayed ringed with leather and steel. Angels stood shoulder to shoulder, forming a wall between the bleeding boy and the bound scorpions on the floor. No one pushed in. No one looked away. Even the bartender, hands still trembling, had edged out from behind the bar to stand at the outer circle, bar towel twisted in her fists. This club owes you, Razor said, voice dropping low so only Eli and Gina could really hear. You hear me? Not just me. All of us. Eli's lips moved. Don't owe me, he whispered. Just don't let them hurt her. His gaze slid to Gina, blurry and haloed in neon. Razor followed it. Something unreadable crossed his face, pride, anger, guilt, all mashed together. They won't touch her again, he said. Not while there's a single bike with our colors left to ride. The sirens hit full volume now, a wailing crescendo just outside. Tires screeched on gravel. Doors slammed. New voices joined the din, clipped and professional, cutting through with commands and questions. Clear a path. Someone shouted. Make room. Angels shifted immediately. The wall of leather opened just enough for paramedics to push through, bright uniforms looking jarringly clean in the smoky, stained clubhouse. One of them dropped to her knees opposite Razor, eyes widening when she saw the amount of blood. Jesus, she breathed. How old is he? Old enough, Gina snapped. Pulse is thready, the paramedic said, fingers to Eli's neck. We need him loaded, now. Razor's hand squeezed Eli's shoulder. You're not done yet, he said. You understand. You brought 300 hearts to your side with what you just did. Don't make us waste that. Eli clung to the words like a rope thrown into dark water. 300. He heard it, dimly, under everything else, the rising rumble outside. Engines firing one by one, then all together. A sound like distant thunder, like a storm answering a call. The paramedics worked fast. Cutting his hoodie, slapping gauze over wounds, sliding him onto a backboard. Every movement jarred something that hurt. Gina hovered at his head, one hand cradling his jaw as if she could keep him from slipping away by sheer grip. They're taking him to county, someone yelled. Let's roll. If anyone wants to see how far 300 bikers will go for a kid who bled on their colors, stick with us, hit like, subscribe, and stay locked in, because this convoy isn't just a ride, it's a declaration. They wheeled Eli toward the door. The cold air outside hit him like a slap, sharp and clean after the smoky heat of the clubhouse. His breath fogged against the oxygen mask they'd strapped over his face. Above him, the night sky was a deep, endless black, sliced by flashing red and blue from the ambulance lights. And beyond that, he saw them. Bikes. Rows of them lined up in the yard and spilling out onto the street. Chrome caught the lights in jagged shards. Patches glowed dully on backs. Riders astride their machines, engines idling low, a sea of faces turned toward the stretcher. 300, give or take. It felt like a whole army. As they lifted him into the back of the ambulance, Eli heard Razor's voice one more time, barking orders over the roar. Nose to tail, he shouted. Nobody between us and that rig. You see scorpion cuts, you call it in, you box them out, but you don't touch them till I say. Gina climbed into the ambulance beside Eli, fingers never leaving his. Razor stepped up to the open doors, filling the frame for a second. He met Eli's gaze. See that? He said. Every one of those engines. That's for you. Eli tried to nod. The world swam. The doors slammed shut, cutting off the roar for a heartbeat, then the siren screamed to life, and the ambulance lurched forward. Through the small back window, as consciousness tugged at him, Eli saw the line fall in behind them. Headlights flared. Engines howled. 300 bikers rode out into the night, a wall of sound around his fragile, beeping world. And somewhere, just beyond the cone of flashing lights, a pair of unseen eyes watched the convoy roll past and disappeared into the dark, already planning what came next. The world came back in pieces. First, the beep. Slow, steady, insistent, like a tiny hammer tapping at the edge of Eli's awareness. Then the light, too white, too clean, pressing against his eyelids until he squinted them open. The ceiling above him wasn't stained concrete or neon glow, it was a plain white grid, tiles and vents and a motionless sprinkler head that looked like a tiny metal flower. His chest ached. Not sharp like before, but deep and dragging, every breath a reminder that something inside had been torn and stitched and forced to keep going anyway. Bandages wrapped tight around his ribs. Tubes snaked from his arms to hanging bags. An oxygen cannula tickled under his nose. For a second, panic flared. He tried to push himself up and the world lurched. Pain flared hot along his side. A choked sound escaped his throat. Hey, hey. Easy. The voice cut through the dizziness, rough with exhaustion and something softer underneath. Gina. She popped into his field of vision, leaning over the rail of the bed. Her hair was pulled back in a messy knot, strands escaping everywhere. The circles under her eyes were dark, like bruises. She wore a clean t-shirt, but her jeans still had oil stains and there was a faint red shadow on her cut where blood hadn't quite washed out. You're in a hospital, she said. You made it, you stubborn idiot. His lips moved. How bad, he rasped. She let out a breath that was half laugh, half leftover sob. 2 bullets, she said. One went clean through your side, one through your chest. Missed anything that would have killed you instantly. Doctors said if you got here 5 minutes later, we'd be having a very different conversation. He swallowed, throat dry. Razor, he managed. He's fine, she said. Pissed. But fine. Her gaze softened. You scared the hell out of him, though, she added. You scared the hell out of all of us. He looked past her, at the bare wall, at the door. Scorpions, he whispered. Her jaw tightened. Cops have them, she said. For now. That's Razor's problem. Yours is breathing and not ripping your stitches when you sneeze. He tried to smile. It pulled at the edges of his mouth like someone tugging on fresh thread. How long? He asked. You've been out for a day and a half, Gina said. In and out before that. Rambling about skulls and trash bags. I stopped listening after the third time you apologized to the floor. He blinked up at her, some of the fog lifting. You stayed? He asked, voice small. Where else would I be? She shot back, but her eyes glistened. You took rounds for me, Eli. For this club. You think I'm gonna just go home and get some sleep? Silence settled between them for a moment, thick and heavy. Outside the room, wheels squeaked. Someone laughed too loudly down the hall. A code was called over the intercom in a bored, crackling voice. None of it seemed to touch the little bubble of air around his bed. If stories like this have you hooked already, like and subscribe so you don't miss what comes after this hospital room, because Eli's about to find out what 2 bullets really bought him in that clubhouse. Eli shifted his hand, inch by inch, until his fingers brushed the back of Gina's wrist. Didn't want you to die on that floor, he said. Didn't think. Just moved. She squeezed his hand, hard. I know, she said. That's what scares me. He wanted to tell her he'd do it again. That if the bullet had to hit someone, he'd rather it be him. But the words tangled in his throat. Instead, his eyes slid to the small window in the room. He froze. Gina, he whispered. Why, are there bikes in the parking lot? She followed his gaze. Outside, beyond the glass, the hospital lot stretched out in rows of painted lines and cars. But along the far edge, where visitors usually parked, a different kind of metal gleamed. Bikes. Dozens of them. Maybe more. A cluster of leather vests and helmets and crossed arms. Men and women leaning against their machines, talking in low voices, eyes occasionally lifting to the hospital doors. They've been there since you came in, she said. Taking shifts. Different crews, different chapters. But the lot's never empty. For me? He asked, disbelief thick in his voice. For you, she said simply. You bled on our colors. That makes you ours. His throat closed. Nobody ever waited for me before, he said. Gina's hand tightened around his. Get used to it, she said. You've got 300 of the loudest, most annoying people on earth on your side now. Time blurred after that. Nurses came and went, checking vitals, changing bandages, telling Eli to take it slow, as if his body planned on sprinting down the hall. Gina dozed in the chair with her feet up on the radiator. Once, Eli woke to find Razor sitting where she'd been, massive frame somehow folded into the same flimsy seat, hands clasped between his knees. The room felt smaller with him in it. Figured you'd show up eventually, Eli croaked. Razor grunted. Figured you'd be awake by now, he said. Doctors said you were too stubborn to stay down. Eli gave a little half-shrug that immediately made him wince. Guess they were right, he said. They sat like that for a while, the beeping and the distant hospital noise filling the gaps. Finally, Razor leaned forward. You remember what happened? He asked. Gun, Eli said. Gina, in front. I didn't want, he trailed off, breathing shallow. Razor nodded once. You saw a line that ended with her on the floor, he said. You stepped into it. No patch. No oath. No promise from us. You just did it. He let that hang there. Eli stared at the blanket pooled over his legs. Anyone would've, he muttered. Razor snorted. Don't ever say that, he said. Most men spend their whole lives telling stories about what they would have done. You didn't tell a story. You made one. Eli didn't know what to do with that. He picked at a loose thread on the blanket, fingers clumsy. So what now? He asked quietly. I go back to, behind the dumpsters. Razor's eyes narrowed. That what you want? He asked. Eli hesitated. He thought of the nights out back, cold concrete, thin blanket, listening to laughter and music through the walls. He thought of waking up with frost on his eyelashes, of counting the hours until he could knock on the back door and hope Gina was there. He thought of the way this room felt, even with its antiseptic smell and itchy sheets, like someone was expecting him to still be in it when they came back. No, he admitted. But I don't fit in there. Not really. Razor leaned back. That's what tonight's about, he said. Tonight? Eli echoed. Razor's mouth quirked. Doctor says you're good to go, he said. Slow. Careful. But good to go. Gina's signing you out in an hour. A flicker of nerves lit in Eli's chest. Where are we going? He asked. Razor stood, the chair creaking with relief as his weight left it. You'll see, he said. Just know this, you're not walking out alone. If you've made it with Eli to this moment, bandaged, scared, and not sure what home even means, hit like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because we're about to wheel him out into a parking lot he will never forget. Discharge was a blur. Paperwork. Instructions. A nurse gently sliding his arm into a clean hoodie, careful around the bandages. Gina helping him swing his legs over the side of the bed, steadying him when the room swayed. The wheelchair, stubborn and squeaky, waiting just inside the door. Ready? She asked. Not even a little, he said. She grinned. Good, she said. Means you're awake. They rolled down the hall. Each doorway held a brief, flickering life, other patients, other stories. A kid watching cartoons too loudly. An old man asleep with his mouth open. A woman staring at the ceiling like it owed her answers. Eli felt small and huge at the same time. Small in his chair, hospital socks sliding on the footrests, huge in the sense that something had shifted around him, even if he couldn't see the shape of it yet. The elevator ride down felt too short. The doors slid open on the lobby, flooded with gray afternoon light. People milled around, families, nurses coming off shift, a security guard by the entrance. No one looked twice at the skinny kid in the wheelchair with the pale face and the hoodie hanging off one shoulder. Then the automatic doors parted. Sound hit him like a wave. Engines. Dozens of them. Hundreds. A low, rolling thunder that vibrated up through the wheels, into his bones. The air outside was cold enough to sting his nose, but it tasted like exhaust and leather and something electric. The parking lot was full. Rows upon rows of bikes lined every space, chrome catching the dull winter light, exhaust ghosting in the air. Men and women in cuts stood or leaned against their machines, patches from different chapters stitched on their backs like a living atlas. Faces turned as the wheelchair eased down the ramp. For a heartbeat, everything seemed to stop. Then someone near the front yelled, "There he is." The roar that went up made the hospital windows rattle. Eli froze. He knew he should be embarrassed, should want to disappear. Instead, his chest swelled with something that hurt in a better way than the bullet wounds ever had. His fingers dug into the armrests. Gina's hands tightened on the wheelchair handles behind him. Razor stepped out from the front line. He walked toward them, boots crunching on grit, wind tugging at the edges of his cut. In his hands, he carried something folded and black. Eli's breath hitched. Razor stopped in front of the chair. He held the vest up. "This," he said, loud enough for the whole lot to hear, "belongs to the kid who reminded all of us what these patches are supposed to mean." The leather caught the light. On the back, the winged skull. Above it, the state rocker. Below, where a name usually sat, a white-stitched strip that read, "Little Brother." Razor's gaze dropped to Eli. "Club voted while you were sleeping off the morphine," he said. "Unanimous. You didn't ask for this. You didn't beg for it. You bled for it. That's the only way it counts." Gina stepped around the chair and took the vest with hands that shook. "You good with this?" she asked Eli. He swallowed. "Yes," he said, voice barely more than air. She eased his uninjured arm through the hole, careful not to pull on the bandages. The other side she draped gently over his chest. The leather settled on his shoulders, heavy and warm, smelling like road dust and oil and something older. Like 100 miles of mistakes and miracles. For a second, he couldn't breathe for a different reason. If this moment, right here, one skinny kid in a too-big vest, facing down 300 engines, hits you in the chest, hit like, subscribe, and stay with us, because what these bikers do next isn't just for show, it's a promise. Razor stepped back. Then, without warning, he dropped to his knees. The president of the club, the man whose word could send 100 bikes roaring into the night, knelt on the cold, dirty asphalt in front of a homeless kid who'd used to sleep behind their dumpsters. A hush fell over the lot. One by one, the others followed. Patch after patch, row after row, men and women in leather lowered themselves onto the ground. Knees hit concrete. Hands rested on thighs. Heads bowed just enough to turn this from a stunt into something like prayer. 300 bikers knelt around Eli. No one told them to. No one choreographed it. It just happened, like thunder following lightning. Eli's eyes blurred. He blinked, but the tears only made the scene shimmer more, the rows of cuts, the glint of chrome, the faint puff of condensation from each rider's breath in the cold air. Gina stepped back to stand beside Razor, then, after a heartbeat's hesitation, she sank to her knees too. Razor looked up at Eli. "You ever sleep outside our fence again," he said, voice carrying clear and hard, "it won't be because you think you don't belong. It'll be because you needed some quiet. You hear me?" Eli laughed, the sound breaking in the middle. "I hear you," he said. Razor nodded. "Then hear this too," he said. "You're not a charity case. You're not a mascot. You're our little brother. Which means anyone who comes for you comes for every one of us." Engines roared to life as if on cue. The sound was deafening, 300 throats of metal and fire, screaming into the gray sky. Eli felt it in his chest, in his teeth, in the still tender wounds under his bandages. It didn't scare him. It felt like a shield. Gina leaned close to his ear, voice barely audible under the thunder. "Welcome home, Eli," she said. For the first time in a long time, the word didn't feel like a place he didn't deserve. It felt like exactly where he was sitting. Wrapped in leather, surrounded by noise, held up by people who'd seen him at his weakest and decided he was worth kneeling for. As the engine settled into a steady rumble and the hospital staff watched wide-eyed from behind glass, Eli knew the scars would ache when it rained. He knew the scorpions weren't gone, just waiting. He knew life wasn't suddenly safe. But it wasn't empty anymore, either. He had a name on his back, a family at his front, and 300 riders between him and whatever came next. And for a kid who used to count the cracks in a concrete wall to fall asleep, that was more than enough.